So I'm going to be honest with you guys, sometimes I have recipe ideas that just won't fill out a full video. I have to kind of figure out a combo recipe to sort of flesh it out a little bit further. This week is kind of two ideas that I had, that neither of which would be very long, but they both fall into the same category of pizza rolls or pockets or generally transportable pizza. Not that you can't carry a slice of pizza on a paper plate around the city and eat it on top of a mailbox like many of us do, but you get what I mean. And I'm throwing in a third bonus recipe, which is a classic pizzeria item called Stromboli. So before we start with any of these, we need to make the dough. And I know I hear you all groaning across the internet. Pizza dough seems like a pain in the ass to make, but let me show you how quick and easy it can be, especially if you have a stand mixer or a food processor. Both of them work for this. So into the bowl of either of them, I'm gonna throw a kilo of bread flour. They'll make 6 10-inch pizzas or 12 little pizza pockets, as you'll see. And the beauty of this recipe is it's by percentage and by weight, so you'll be able to infinitely divide or multiply based on how much dough you need. And I like bread flour because it has extra gluten content, which gives it the kind of chew that I expect out of a good slice of pizza. But you can totally use all-purpose flour, it just won't be quite as chewy. Next, I'm adding 1 packet or 7 grams of active dry yeast. I have in my notes to use 1.5% yeast to the amount of flour, but that's not exactly accurate. You don't need more yeast because it's a living thing and it'll keep eating as long as there's food. Now I'm going to add in 1.5% or 15 grams of salt. This is strictly for seasoning. And I'm going to be using a pizza oven, but if you're using a home oven with a pizza stone or pizza steel, you may want to add in an equal amount of sugar, which will help with browning. And right now the humidity here is a little bit high because it's springtime, it started to rain. So I'm using a 60% hydration, which means I'm using 600 milliliters or 600 grams of water to my kilo of flour. If it's a little bit on the dry side where you are, you can up that percentage to 65%, but just know the more water you add, the stickier the dough will be and the harder it will be to handle later on. And I like to mix it by hand. You totally don't have to, but I like to do some of the work just to speed up the process a little bit. So I just want to incorporate it. Then I'll use my hook attachment and set it on speed 2 for about 5 minutes. With a food processor, I don't think you need as much time. I think you really just want to pulse it together because those blades spin really fast and are going to develop the gluten a little bit better. And once it's good and kneaded, I'm going to divide this into 6 balls. For the 1600-ish grams of dough that I have here, that works out to be 270 grams per ball. And I'm going to pop those into these tall deli containers so they have room to expand. No need for lubrication or anything. It doesn't matter if it sticks to the walls. It'll be fairly easy to get out, and we don't have to worry about the shape at this point. So just toss it in there, throw a lid on there, and I'm going to do what's called a cold ferment. That means I'm going to throw it in the fridge overnight, which allows the yeast to still be active, but not very active. They'll take their time eating, the dough won't expand too much, and it'll generate a lot of flavor that you won't really get if you just leave it on the counter to rise at room temperature. So the next day, you'll see it's risen a little bit, probably 1.5 to 2 times the volume of what it was before. So I'll remove those from their containers, form them into taut dough balls by folding the ends in towards each other, and then pinching and twisting them shut, sort of like a mantou or bao bun. And I like putting them into these shallow bowls, which I have greased with a little bit of oil. It just works out so that once they rise on a countertop, they'll just turn into a naturally easy to work with pizza dough shape. So make sure the bowl is greased on all sides so it doesn't stick to the bowl or the plastic wrap that we'll throw on top. And let that sit for anywhere from an hour to 3 hours. Really depends on the temperature of your kitchen and how fast that yeast is willing to work. Alright, so the first idea I had has to do with Costco. Every time I'm at Costco, I come very close to purchasing, but I never actually end up purchasing, a chicken bake, which is a tubular log of pizza dough filled with chicken and cheese and bacon and Caesar dressing. It looks frightening and yet delicious, and it has over 800 calories, so I just don't feel like diving into that. But doing it at home, you can sort of track how many calories everything is, so this should be a little bit less calorie intensive. So I'm going to press out my dough just like I would with a pizza, pressing it out in every direction until it is about 10 inches wide. The only difference with a pizza is I don't really care about the handle because it's all going to be rolled up into a log. And feel free to use a rolling pin here. It's going to fluff up a little bit regardless. We don't want it to be too thick, but once I've got my pie ready, I'm going to dole out about a tablespoon of Caesar dressing. I'm using this Ken's tableside Caesar. I'm not sure what kind of Caesar dressing they use at Costco, but whatever, same flavor components should be there. I'll spread that out with a spoon like a pizza. Then I'll add in a handful of cubed up mozzarella. This is that low moisture stuff that we use for pizza over here. For the chicken, I am going to take some boneless, skinless chicken thighs, season them lightly with salt and pepper, toss them in the oven for 20 minutes, and once they're fully cooked, I'll cut them into cubes, and throw a handful of that on top of here. Next we need some bacon, so I'm going to dice up a few slices of smoked bacon. Fry that until most of the fat renders out. I feel like for some reason all of these mass-produced fast food items use bacon with very little remaining fat. Probably just deep fry it or bake it for a while just to make it easy on production. But anyway, we've got some nice little crispy bacon bits here that'll sprinkle on top. Next up, I need some provolone. The only young provolone I could find in my store was the cold cut slices, so I'll just dice that into little squares. And I'll crank out a good portion of Parmesan. I'm going to roll it up like a burrito, so fold in both ends. Roll it into a tube. And then the pictures looked like they had some sort of cheese coating on the outside. I'm guessing it's Parmesan, so I'll brush this with some olive oil. That'll also help us achieve the nice golden brown look that they have going on. And I'll sprinkle some Parm on top of that before throwing it in the oven. Now I'm using a pizza oven, so I've got it set to the New York setting for about 4 or 5 minutes. But for your conventional home oven, set it to, I'd say as close to 500F or 260C as you can get. We want to bake it quickly so it doesn't dry out too much. The longer you have it going for at high temperature, the drier and crispier the dough will get. Next up, I'm going to make some little pizza pockets called Panzerotti. I forget where I heard about these first, but they sounded interesting. It's basically a mini calzone, and they can be either baked or fried. And since I've got enough dough here, I'm going to do both. So I realized at this point I probably should have divided my dough ball in half, so I got 2 small dough balls, but that's alright. I'll just cut it in half now, shape it into 2 sort of pie shapes. It's kind of oblong, but that's alright. I'm going to spread a spoonful of canned crushed tomatoes on one half of either one, and you can add a sprinkle of oregano, which I forgot, no big deal. I'll add a handful of that low moisture mozzarella. And next I've got some ham, which I'll cut into little squares. I'm going to fold these over, press them shut as best as I can. I probably should use a fork on both of them, and I probably should have rolled these out with a rolling pin, because as you'll see with the baked one, it kind of puffs up quite a bit. I don't really mind because it actually makes that edge of the dough kind of fluffy, just like the edge of a pizza. But if you want to be a little bit more traditional, then yeah, go ahead and use a fork to crimp it down. Now for the fried version, I'm just going to throw some regular frying oil into a skillet. Heat it up to a good temperature until it starts rippling and shimmering. And I'll drop in my other panzerotto, which you can see I crimped. but you'll also see that I did not quite seal it properly. So I had to be very careful with this so that it didn't splatter too much. And I just kept flipping it, cooking it evenly on both sides until it got nice and golden brown.
There we go.
That looks so good. Now, finally for the Stromboli, and yes, the singular is Stromboli because it's named after a island, volcano somewhere called Stromboli. I'm gonna do one of my favorite pizza toppings, which is some mozzarella, some sopressade, which is a peppery dried salami, and normally I like Calabrian chilies, but I have this bomba de calabrese, which has a bunch of different things in it. Some garlic, some mushrooms, chili peppers, all sorts of different flavorful ingredients. Just a delicious spread. So I'll drizzle some of that on top. And for the Stromboli, the ends are typically left open. You could spread the toppings the whole way across and roll it up so it's a spiral, but in New York I find that most of them are just folded like this. So same deal, throw that in the pizza oven. And now we're ready to dig on in. So starting with the Panzerotti, the baked version is just like your standard calzone. I like the addition of the tomatoes inside. Usually over here we just have a white version and you dip it in tomato sauce, but this is kind of just all in one. The fried version is definitely better for obvious reasons. It's got that nice crispy, greasy outer layer. The chicken bake brings something else entirely to the table. It doesn't taste like a normal pizza topping. Maybe it's similar to a salad slice if you ever had one of those, minus the lettuce. It's just got that Caesar vibe. It's really good in its own right, and I think you should probably make your own rather than going to Costco, because I think that this is probably better than what they can crank out. And finally, my favorite, the Stromboli. You get so much flavor out of that sopressade. You get so much flavor out of that bomba. This is legit so good. If you can't get your hands on that bomba stuff, try and get some chilies packed in oil. Sometimes I like to put a drizzle of honey on at the end because the sweetness balances out that heat. But regardless, all three of these are a really nice twist on pizza night.